The Houston Texans emerged as one of the better teams in the NFL last season, coming out of nowhere with their new coaching staff and players, making it to the playoffs, winning their division, and winning a playoff game. I don't think anyone would argue with me if I said that Houston was a solid football team right now. But I think the Texans, led by Stroud and DeMeco Ryans, are going to be one of the best football teams going into 2024, and I'm going to tell you why. The rebuild started back in 2021. After a 4-12 season in 2020, the Houston Texans elected to hire Nick Caserio as general manager on January 7th. This was after Caserio was a part of the New England Patriots staff for 20 years, 2 decades, and had been teased as being the new GM for the Houston Texans the 2 years prior to his hire date. It never ended up going through. He remained loyal to the Patriots, but then in 2021, it finally happened. However, the Texans would not see instant success with their new GM, only winning 4 games the following year in 2021, and then only 3 in 2022. Even though through those 2 seasons they only won 7 games combined, they didn't finish last in their division either year, which is pretty funny. Then the Texans started their next chapter in January of 2023, hiring head coach DeMeco Ryans. He was with San Francisco for 6 years and was the defensive coordinator for 2021 and 2022. Ryans then proceeded to bring in his friend from San Francisco, Bobby Slowick, to be the Houston Texans offensive coordinator and offensive play caller, obviously with Ryans being a defensive-minded coach after being a DC for the past 2 years. And let me just say, over the past season, the Houston Texans have been another perfect example of how important a strong head coach is, how important a strong GM is, how important the NFL draft is. When Ryans was hired, he had less than 3 months to prepare for the NFL draft, and he got to work with the Texan staff. You look at some of the teams that have gotten good recently through the draft, like the Lions, or some of the teams that seems like every year they just have a rookie star somewhere on the field, like the Chiefs, the Packers. And it's one thing to get the talent, but if you don't have a strong coaching staff, you don't have a good culture, your player's not going to develop. And that's just one thing the Texans have done a great job building over the past year. They have developed a super strong culture, and obviously there's a lot to get into. Going to the 2023 NFL draft, the Texans select CJ Stroud with their 2nd overall pick. And CJ Stroud isn't just a great quarterback, but he's a great guy. I mean, I haven't met him, but just from watching his interviews, the way he carries himself, the way he talks about himself, his family, his team, he's really motivating, and he's a great leader for his team. If you watch his interview after he was drafted, watching it now, it's like, how could I have not seen this guy would be amazing? He just is like, I'm going to go out there and be whatever my team needs me to be, and if they need a leader, I'm going to be that leader. And obviously you can be a great guy and not be the best quarterback. CJ Stroud showed it on the field this year, finished 8th in total passing yards with over 4,000 out of all the NFL quarterbacks, threw 23 touchdowns as a rookie and then won Rookie of the Year. The Texans then shocked the world, traded up to the 3rd overall pick, going back-to-back and drafted edge rusher Will Anderson out of Alabama. And Will Anderson had a phenomenal season, recording 7 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, tons of pressures, and won Defensive Rookie of the Year. The Texans went back-to-back, and you may say, oh, that's not that crazy. I could have predicted that, 2nd pick, 3rd pick, they're going to be good. There's tons of busts in the 1st round of the NFL. Look at Bryce Young. Look at how many quarterbacks have been drafted in the 1st round over the past 10 years. Not all of them are hits. And just a phenomenal job coaching by the Texans. Phenomenal job drafting and scouting. And speaking of the great job of coaching that DeMeco Ryans and the Texans have brought their team, Jonathan Greenard is a perfect example. He was entering his 4th year with the Texans last season, had a slow start, played linebacker his rookie year, only started 1 game, picked it up his 2nd year, recording 8 sacks, dropped down his 3rd year, only recording 1.5 sacks, dealt with injuries. DeMeco Ryans comes in this season, Greenard played all 15 games and recorded 12.5 sacks. Now every NFL fan knows his name and wants their team to pick him up during free agency, and he's most likely going to resign with the Texans. He loves the team. I'm not saying it was all DeMeco Ryans. Obviously, he helped a lot with his schemes and drafting well, putting Anderson on the other side. Anderson and Greenard are unstoppable together. They become one of the best edge rusher duos in the NFL. I would say they should be higher up on this list. It has worked out amazingly. Greenard had the talent. DeMeco Ryans coming in with a defensive mind and playing to his abilities, letting Greenard thrive. And just listening to him talk, CJ Stroud talk, Will Anderson talk, they're all just extremely motivating to listen to. They all have great mindsets, amazing personalities. Obviously, I don't know them. I've just heard their interviews, but just from what I've heard, amazing. And it doesn't end there. It only gets better. Before I get into the next big thing I want to talk about, this is the Texans' points per game allowed in 2022 here on the left. They finished 27th, allowing an average of 24.7 points per game allowed. 27th out of the 32 NFL teams. And then defensive-minded coach DeMeco Ryans comes in. Will Anderson, most notably, is drafted. Greenard steps up, and another great defensive player to mention, Derek Stingley, cornerback, in his second year. He's been dealing with injuries, but he's a lockdown corner, had 5 interceptions over the last 9 games of the season, and the Texans defense jumps to 11th out of the 32 NFL teams in points per game allowed, averaging 21.1 per game. Moving back to the offense, in the 3rd round of last year's draft with the 69th overall pick, they drafted wide receiver Dell, who is an absolute beast. The Texans brought in a rookie quarterback, but they didn't set him up for failure. Obviously, CJ Stroud, extremely talented, tons of great qualities about him, but the Texans formed a team that a rookie quarterback could come into and grow and gain experience and become a better quarterback and adjust to the NFL. They got an offensive line. It dealt with a lot of injuries last season and sometimes wasn't the best, but there was some solid talent on the offensive line. CJ Stroud had protection. They gave him some pretty solid running backs, Dameon Pierce, Singletary, and an extremely good wide receiver room. Starting with Dell, had 709 yards and 7 touchdowns in only 11 games played. Sadly was injured, but phenomenal rookie season. And then moving on, obviously, can't leave out Nico Collins. What an amazing breakout season. Nearly 1,300 yards, 80 receptions, 8 touchdowns. This team is just so exciting. And also, Dalton Schultz, phenomenal tight end. Played all 15 games this season. Almost had 700 yards, 5 touchdowns. This team could win the Super Bowl next year. Watch out for the draft. If they get another solid wide receiver, it could be game over. They're going to beef up their offensive line, beef up the wide receiver room, beef up the defense. I'm so excited to watch the Texans next year. They had a great draft last year. Who's to say they're not going to do it again? DeMeco Ryans and Caserio are great at drafting. And just everything about this team, the leadership on this team, the team's mentality, the culture that Ryans and just CJ Stroud and Anderson that they've brought with them, and Greenard, phenomenal leader on the defense. This team just won their division. They just won the AFC South. I mean, their record obviously wasn't like anything too crazy, 10-7, but next year I could see this team losing only 3 or 4 games. I think a big part of the population of NFL fans will expect the Texans to compete for the division, compete for a wild card place. I just don't think a lot of people will expect them to be as dominant as they will next year. This may be too bold of a prediction, but I just think they're too good offensively with CJ Stroud throwing to Dell and Nico Collins. Just so explosive. Like, not only are they really good, they're so excited to watch. And just the team's culture, just listening to the players talk, Will Anderson, Greenard, their defense is improving. I just don't see how you're beating this team.